Signore e signori, buonasera, benvenuti alla Casa Italiana Zerilli-Marimò. Sono Stefano Albertini, il direttore. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight. As you know, tonight, as many nights this semester, we are having a double bill that features two minor figures in the history of humanity. One is Leonardo da Vinci and the other one is William Shakespeare. The first part of the evening is going to be with geologist Ann Pizzorusso, and you're here for this event. And the second part of the evening, starting at 7:30, is going to be with our theater company residents that are going to talk about the Italian Shakespeare, how Shakespeare was influenced by authors such as Boccaccio and Machiavelli. So we are with an evening in company of geniuses. And we are beginning with Ann Pizzorusso and her new book, Tweeting Da Vinci. Beautiful art both in the cover and inside. It's very rich with illustrations, images, photographs, many of the images and the photographs taken especially for this book. Ann Pizzorusso is a geologist. She studied geology. She had a brilliant career in her field, and she finished her career as an official geologist. She never stopped being a geologist, as Director of Environmental Affairs for Philips Electronic North America. She did all the things that geologists do, drilling, seismic prevention, but she has always been particularly concerned with environmental studies and environmental protection, and she received many awards recognizing the work that she did in that capacity. She has always loved Italy, where her family's roots are, and art. And at a certain point, she decided to leave this very important corporate position, and she decided to devote herself entirely to her two passions, again, Italy and art, without forgetting where she came from, that was geology. And she undertook a journey that took her back to Italy, and she's now a resident of both New York and Naples, and she's a citizen of both countries. And the first article that Anne published in her new capacity as a geologist turned Renaissance scholar turned art historian was really an earthquake in the world of art history. And let me tell you, I know directly from some art historians, friend of mine, what that article meant. Because it was for the first time that a scientist, namely a geologist, entered in the field of art history and revealed a very complicated, diplomatically, heatedly debated issue regarding the Virgin of the Rocks by Leonardo da Vinci. As you know, there are two Virgin of the Rocks, one in London and one in Paris. And Ann Pizzorusso, based on her research in geology, demonstrated beyond any doubt that the original one is the one in the Louvre. She basically argued that the specific, precise, and scientifically accurate depiction of the rocks that you have in the Louvre, in the French version, can only be attributed to Leonardo. Whereas the very evident mistakes that you have in the other one really signal that it could not possibly come from Leonardo. Again, Anne's life is a life about intersections. It's about being Italian and being American. It's about being a geologist and being an art historian, being a woman very much of our time and being also very much with her head in the Renaissance. And in this book, she completed the journey that she began with that famous article. I think the Corriere della Sera put it in the first page, and all the papers in the world talked about it. The British were not very happy about it. They had to come to terms with it, also because after Anne's geology research, she also added a part about the botanics, confirming the same thing, and then she got other scientists involved, and now there is written evidence, notary documents and things of that sort that do nothing but confirm what Anne first described solely based on her geological research. The book we are presenting tonight is a book that really expands on that beginning. And it's a book that is a discovery or rediscovery of Italy through geology. So Anne explains her journey through the country of her ancestors through the reading key or through the lens of geology, and she also reveals all the things that you can understand from geology. I'm not a geologist, I know nothing about geology, but reading Anne's book, you really understand that she's providing you with a key to understand development of religion, art, any form of culture that has a connection with these very specific science. I also love the fact that Anne proved some of her professors in Renaissance studies wrong when they told her that there is no geology in Dante and Da Vinci. And she basically went about, and in her journey, that, as I said in my invitation to this event, is not over because Anne is continuously studying and producing new research. I think the best thing she did is that she proved these professors wrong. There is geology in everything, and it's a fascinating reading key to understand history, to understand literature, to understand the visual arts, and much more. And without further ado, I would like to invite you to welcome Ann Pizzorusso.
Good evening, everyone. Please excuse me. I'm trying to recover from laryngitis, sinus infection today. So I'm loading down with medicines. But it doesn't curb my enthusiasm for being here tonight and for taking you on this magical journey. So we'll have the next slide. First of all, the title. Everybody asks about the title. Well, Leonardo da Vinci did tweet in his lifetime, and he wrote little notes. And if he had actually had a Twitter account, we might have had the airplanes, scuba diving equipment, robots, hurricane identification systems, hundreds of years before their time. What he did is he wrote these little notes and he wrote these little sketches, and he just lacked the technology, which today he'd be tweeting every day, that's for sure. Next slide. This is one of the things that he also tweeted about. And if you look at these curlicue patterns here, these are called vortex flow patterns. And he wrote just a little tweet about the vortex flow pattern. Next slide. And what happened is that it ended up being, he identified the hurricane. So this vortex flow pattern is just a pattern of water and air revolving around an imaginary axis. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about our fabulous Italy. Next slide. We have the Earth. And the Earth is divided, much like a jigsaw puzzle, in plates. All the plates move around. So, you know, if you have a jigsaw puzzle put together, things can break up. So if you look at Italy, Italy is on the intersection of three major plates. So Italy is being crunched, and it's like in the middle of a three-car pileup. Next slide. Here's the African plate pushing up, and it's pushing the Alps up. The Alps are even rising today as we talk. Italy is also being pushed in a counterclockwise direction. Then you have this little microplate, which acts like a splinter, if you ever had a splinter that's very painful. And this was the cause of the earthquake that occurred in Reggio Emilia 2 years ago. Look at Sicily. Sicily is being pushed in a lot of directions. But the nice thing is that they should not build the bridge over the Strait of Messina, because in about 5 million years, Sicily is going to be connected to Calabria, so they don't have to spend any money. You heard it here first. Next slide. Okay, so now, Italy has the Apennines, which very much act as like our spine, a bunch of vertebrae. We're always going to have earthquakes there. No matter what happens, they're not going to stop, because it's like bouncing around because the whole country is being scrunched. Now, the cool thing is, I want to tell you a little bit about where its various parts came from, because it's very much like a patchwork quilt, where you have all these different kinds of fabrics. Well, the fabrics of Italy are their rocks. So you have limestone here, which is much like the Caribbean. All these islands grew up, and the limestone came out of an ancient tropical sea that was about 250 million years ago. Then we have Corsica and we have Sardinia. Now these two little guys were once part of the whole place here near Marseille and Barcelona. You know that little curve? Well, they decided they wanted to leave France and Spain. And so they just kind of broke off, right? But it gets more interesting because there was another little part here, and they decided they didn't want to stay here. So one part, they both traveled down south. One part became the toe of Calabria, and the other part became the part around Messina. And so now they're all, you know, in new positions, and they're still moving around. Now, let's have the next slide, please. Before I get to this, I want to tell you, with all this movement, have you ever been to, like, Kansas, where you're driving, right, and it's all flat, and you can see the horizon? Well, Italy is not like that, because what you have is, with all the collisions and the three-car pileups, this is Italy, okay? So you have the mountains, you have the gorges, you have a phenomenal landscape, and it's caused by all those plates that crash into one another. Now this is the area around Naples. Here is the harbor of Naples, and this area is called the Campi Flegrei. There's about 24 craters here. A lot of craters are underwater, and a lot are on land, and the whole land is pockmarked. But this made for fascinating history. This is where Virgil had Aeneas made landfall here at Kuma. And then he entered into the underworld at Lake Averno. And I'm going to show you pictures, and you can actually follow along in the sixth book of the Aeneid by actually going to all these places. You can even find the river Styx underground. Next slide, please. Here is what Virgil used as the model for the underworld. This was right outside his home. He lived in Pozzuoli. This is the Solfatara. It exists today. You can visit it. Can you imagine Virgil walking out and seeing these flaming fields? If you walk on the soil, it's very hot. It's one of the most dangerous places on Earth, much more dangerous than Vesuvius because it can blow at any time. Next slide. This is the entrance to what they had originally thought was the grotto of the Sybil of Kuma, where she gave her prognostications to military and priests and political leaders. It's been proven not to be the entrance to her sacred site. However, the geology is what I want to show you. This is all carved out of yellow Neapolitan tuff. This tuff is a volcanic stone, but it's easy to carve, and this was carved in the 3rd century BC. So look at how it's maintained its integrity, its structural and architectural beauty after 2,500 years. It's the stone that was durable and beautiful. And you have this magnificent hexagonal pattern with little slits where the light comes in. It's a magical place. Next slide. This is the Sybil of Kuma. Why is she painted on the Sistine Chapel? Well, it turns out in medieval times, the Sibyls were considered prophets. Virgil in his eclogues talked about the coming of a Messiah, And supposedly the Sibyls promoted this idea. So Michelangelo chose to portray not only the Sybil of Kuma, but other Sibyls on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Next slide. This is Lake of Veradom. This is in that same area of the Phlegraean fields. And this is where Virgil described his entrance in the underworld. There's a grotto here. But first of all, what does Averno mean in Greek? Averno comes from the Greek meaning lacking in birds. Why? Because at the time of Virgil, there were a lot of toxic gases coming out of this area. And birds are not stupid. They didn't want to die, so they didn't go to the lake. And so they called it Avernus, without birds, okay? So Virgil describes the Sybil of Kuma taking him into the entrance of the underworld. They described earthquakes. He said the ground shook. At that time, they had earthquakes. Then he goes down and he crosses the river Styx. If you want to go in, there's a Roman military tunnel right here on the lake, and there's an underground river. Now, it might come from an aquifer or a fault, but it all exists. Next slide. This is Napoli. Here's Naples. Here's our wonderful Vesuvius, the Sorrento Peninsula. And what really blew me away is that many poets came to Naples, and they all had nervous breakdowns. And what happened was Goethe and Shelley all came there, had these nervous breakdowns, and then went on to write their best works. Shelley wrote this incredibly beautiful poem, Ode to Naples, and it just describes the impact and the power that the earth had on him. And the same thing happened to Goethe. Now, Shelley's wife was Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. She wrote Frankenstein, and she had Dr. Victor Frankenstein. He was born in Naples. And then she went on to write other works, all set here. So you have Mark Twain, Charles Dickens, Alexander Dumas, all these very famous authors who were just struck by the land. The land was what compelled them. The land affected them, and once they experienced this land, they were able to go on to other things. Next slide. Here's Goethe. Goethe came from Germany, of course. He went and he made his grand tour all the way down to Sicily and just was amazed by the earth, the volcanoes, the aliveness of the earth. And he also described how crazy the Neapolitans were. And he said he really felt that the Neapolitans were crazy because they were living with death, like every day, like this menace of the earth. Because at the time the volcano was active, you can see the smoke coming out. And he said people having to live with that intense pressure of imminent death have a different philosophy. Next slide. This is one of my favorite places. This is a place you can see today, and this comes from Sin City. Now, if any of you have been to Saint-Tropez or Las Vegas and think those cities are bad, you haven't seen anything yet. This is Baia. Baia, during the Roman times, was full of power, plenty, and lots of perversion. Anything went, because you had all the Roman emperors there, you had the military fleet, you had money, and anything went. So it was party central. And you know what? The earth even got involved in the party, because they had all these Roman villas, right? And then you know how the stage can go up and down, right? Well, they had the villas, and then they had these this big Roman thermal spa, which of course all of the hot water and the steams came from the earth. So you didn't have to heat the water, you just got it from the earth. It was like really cool. But today these villas are not there. The thermal spa is there, the villas are not. Why? Because the earth has like a big balloon, a magma chamber underneath, and it just rose the earth or made the earth go underwater. So all of the Roman villas were gently pushed underwater, and they still exist today. This is a replica of a statue, but you can go scuba diving or snorkeling. They're only about 20 feet below. You can see all the mosaics, all of the columns, and, you know, maybe someday the earth will bring these villas right back up. But it's the most extraordinary thing you'll ever see in your life. Next slide. Also, since the water bubbles with all these gases and fumaroles, these are replicas because this is a statue of the Nymphaeum of Claudius. The real statues are now in a museum, but everything else is real, including the mosaic floors underwater. But it's just a marvel to see. Next. I want to briefly talk to you about the Etruscans who lived in Tuscany about 1200 BC. And next slide. They built their cities on volcanic outcrops. There were a lot of buttes there for defensive purposes. So the land really gave them what they needed to build very strong, secure settlements. Next slide. The land was also very beautiful because this, of course, is volcanic rock, which has been eroded into this beautiful drapery pattern, which in Italian they call calanchi. But these gorges, they couldn't go over the gorges, so they became excellent engineers and bridge builders. You can still see the foundations of many of the extraordinary Etruscan bridges. Next. They also had volcanic activity. So they had these wonderful thermal vapors which came out, and now they have this geothermal plant at Larderello, which is the third largest geothermal plant in the world. Next slide. They also have the marvelous baths, which are free of charge. I've experienced many of them, and they're all full of minerals and warm waters, and they're very good for your health. Next slide. They also dug out these incredibly mysterious cave roads. These are like between 60 and 90 feet tall. But once again, how could they do it? The volcanic rock is easy to excavate, but yet it's very strong. And they're only about 8 feet wide, so as you're walking through them, you really do feel claustrophobic. But nobody knows what they're for. Some are parallel, others are in labyrinth form, and they just don't know what the purpose was. It seems like if they were using them for religious purposes, would be a little bit exaggerated, but who knows? Go ahead, next slide. This is also the sacred Lake Bolsena, which is another volcanic lake in Tuscany, and it has 2 sacred islands. Just to give you an idea of this, the magnitude of this lake, I arrived at the hotel about midnight one night, and when I opened my window the next morning, I thought I was on the Mediterranean. This lake is 44 square miles. This lake is twice the island of Manhattan in terms of superficial area. It's big. Next slide. They also categorized lightning. The Etruscans were very big in looking at signs from the earth, lightning, thunder, and they lived in a very highly charged atmosphere, and they felt that everything that happened was a sign from God. Next. The priests also had their garb, and this garb, the headdress and the staff, exist today in the bishop's outfit of the Catholic Church, the cardinal's outfit. It's all Etruscan garb. Next. Italy has an incredible number of caverns and grottos, and they come mainly from the limestone, because as limestone degenerates or gets eroded, it forms these magnificent, magnificent caverns. Next slide. This is the Grotto of Frescoes. Next slide. These are flow stones. These form when rivulets of calcium-laden water drip very gently. Next. These are called soda straws in English, or spaghetti in Italian. Next. This is how a column forms when a stalagmite and a stalactite end up connecting. Next. Now, in 1932, in Puglia, archaeologists found this incredible cave. And what they found was there were all these like terracotta little vases in them used to collect drip water coming from the stalactites. And archaeologists have no idea why ancient man would do this. This was all prehistoric times. Next slide. This is what happened. This is in a museum, and the stalagmite grew so large it broke the terracotta vase. They don't know why they did it, because they certainly weren't doing it for drinking water. They had adequate drinking water, and the drops, didn't really amount to that much. Next slide. However, modern medical science has now analyzed these drops, because up till about 100 years ago, all the women used to go to these caves and collect this drip water and rub it on their breasts to assure adequate breast milk. And these caverns were called latai, or milk caverns. And they were also thought to ensure fertility. And now modern science has analyzed these droplets, and they found that they have bacteria and fungi and minerals, all which are used to promote healing and are like a natural antibiotic. So what the ancients knew is now being proved by modern science. Next. And it goes on. Romulus and Remus, the symbol of Rome, were nurtured by a she-wolf, and they lived in a grotto. Next. This is at Tivoli, the fountain of Diana of Ephesus, with the same fertility image in it. Next slide. Now, St. Francis was the original ecologist. He believed that animals, plants, rocks were all created by God. And what happened was, as he went about with his preachings, especially preaching to the populace, it became popular to portray natural images in paintings. And this is a painting by Giotto. You can see the cave at La Verna where St. Francis received the stigmata. St. Francis lived in a rock cell. He slept on a rock bed. Next. Now, Italy is different. We all know that. But if you look at these caves in France and in Spain that have these rock drawings like Lascaux or Altamira. Right now, these are closed to the public. Like, very few scholars can go, but like you and I, we're not going to get in. We'll go to the fake version of it. But Italy has never been like that. Their grottos are always open. They're open. And what happens is the spiritual nature of these grottos, the thousands of years of ritual, is palpable. This is in Puglia. This is the Grotto of St. Michael. But before it was St. Michael, it was a pagan site, but a sacred site. And the Catholic Church is really good at rebranding. So what they did is they just put up a new sign. This is now St. Michael. And you have a great, new place to work your miracles. And it is sacred. The walls weep the water. They sell the rocks. And it is just a magnificent place. Next slide. Now, even though grottos were considered sacred spaces, something got messed up in the Renaissance, because what happened was all the rich people who wanted to show how rich they were decided, well, what's the best? Should I have a new Prada bag or a BMW? No, we got to have a grotto. But we have to have a fake grotto that looks really, really real. And so they just hired all of these artisans, like Michelangelo, the best artisans, to kind of make all these stalactites and stalagmites out of stucco. And the one who had the best grotto was like considered, I don't know, wealthy, but you were really supposed to go to the grotto for metaphysical reasons, but that kind of got lost. So, next slide. I want to move on to Dante because I found geology in Dante as well. He was like amazing because he knew about the physics of light in refracting and reflecting off gems. He knew their physical properties, and then he had the knowledge of a gemologist. He was like friggin' incredible. He had all these words that only a gem merchant would use. So what happened is with this knowledge, he produced the best metaphors in the world. Let's go on. So pearls, he used pearls because he knew the inner radiance of the pearl, how it kind of radiated from inside. And he used this as a metaphor for St. Benedict, who was the founder of monasticism and was a really pure spirit. And he contrasted St. Benedict with the corruption in the Catholic Church. Next slide. Rubies, these are the souls, the fiery souls of the Christian warriors. Next slide. The sapphire. Dante was the first to identify the sapphire blue with the Blessed Virgin. Next slide. Also, the star sapphire. Dante talked about these the rays of light that went along the axis of a star sapphire. Next. Topaz. Topaz, he talks about his great-grandfather, Cacciaguida, as being the great topaz, kind of a compliment like the chip off the old block. Next, the diamond. The diamond is the hardest element on Earth, but it's pure and it's hard and luminescent. And he described this when he went closer and closer to see the divine light. Next. Amber. Amber's not a mineral, but it is fossilized tree resin. And what's very interesting is that many people described its healing properties. They said amber was good for fevers and arthritis. And even up until the 1920s, women wore amber necklaces to protect against goiter before iodine was discovered as a cure. People are like, why? In the 1930s, European biochemists analyzed the amber, and they found it had succinic acid in it. Succinic acid is like an amino acid. It's vital to our metabolism, and we would not be able to live without it. And now, while there's not proof, but people think if you wear amber, your body heat will allow the succinic acid to penetrate your body. But that's not proven, but what is proven is now in all the pharmaceutical plants, we manufacture succinic acid. You go in your medicine cabinet, look at your medicines, they all have succinic acid in it. So another case of where the ancients knew something and we're only finding it out now. Next slide. Now I want to bring you to the Fountain of Youth Island, which is my favorite place. I'm actually 150 years old, but once I started going to the island, I'm losing a lot of years here. This is Iskia in the Gulf of Naples. And next slide. See, so you can go in these waters and you just get younger and younger. Next. And you can even have this marvelous mud painted on you, and your skin becomes silky and young. Next. Now, the Greeks first settled here in 750 BC. And even they knew about the efficacy of these waters, because in the 1700s, all these votive offerings were found. And they were thanking Apollo for the cure. People were cured. People felt good by taking these waters. And the question is, why does everybody feel good? Next slide. The reason is, in 1918, Marie Curie went to Iskia and she analyzed the waters. She had just discovered radioactivity shortly before, and the waters are radioactive. So what you have there is you have a trifecta. You have heat, minerals, and you have radioactivity. Now, this is not high-level radioactivity. It's just enough to make you glow at night. But now, once again, modern medical science is showing that low levels of radioactivity improves your immune system, is good for what ails you, and that you can Google it on National Institute of Health. These waters are good for childhood asthma. I mean, what these waters are good for is absolutely amazing. So once again, modern science is now showing what the ancients knew intuitively. Next. I want to talk a bit about our friend Leonardo da Vinci, who went into the Alps and he studied the fossils there. He was getting into a lot of trouble with the Catholic Church because Catholic Church, was talking about the deluge and the earth being 6,000 years old, and Leonardo did not agree. So he wrote a lot of things that are actually geologically very, very accurate. Next. He did these amazing drawings, and I mean, you can see, but a geologist can see his attention to detail with the drainage patterns. We've put this alongside a real map of Tuscany, and it's perfect. And we're saying, like, where was he? Was he in an airplane? I mean, how could he get this perspective? He was that good. Next. Now, this is what I was talking to you before about this vortex flow pattern. And he drew it and he tweeted about it. And now in the 1970s, we discovered what he had written in 1510 is a hurricane. Next. See, there's a real hurricane, but it took satellites and it took modern meteorology to prove what he had already written about. Next slide. See, here. Next slide. And even the earth gives us our pigments. Many, we go to Janovic, we go to wherever we go to buy our paint, and it's mixed to perfection. But painters up to 100 years ago had to use paints that were very toxic, had arsenic and lead. And they think that Caravaggio might have had lead poisoning, that Renoir might have had diabetes or blindness because of arsenic. So they were very, very toxic. Next slide. However, this is from a fresco from Tiberius's villa. They were very durable. This is a piece over 2,000 years old. So you can see that the color really lasts. Next. So now I want to just check how many Leonardo experts we have here. Raise your hands. Okay. There's 7 in the back, so you be quiet right now. All right. So I want to go on next to ask you to just look at these 2 pictures. And I'm going to shut up. You just have to, like, whatever comes to mind, and then we're going to kind of go along, but just anything that pops into your head. I will tell you this is in the Louvre, and this is in the National Gallery, and Stefano has already told you a little bit about it, but I just want you to see the two side by side and just get your visceral feel. Is it a feeling? Do you see anything? Okay, let's go on. Now, this is the Louvre. And yeah, I think if you can. Can you lower the lights up here? Yeah, I want to make sure you see this. Okay, all right, yeah, there we go. All right. So I'm going to go in a little bit more detail, but if you look here, it's like bedded sandstone. You've all seen bedded rocks. There's some pebbles here. You can see this line here. You can see the rock changes texture from here to here. You can see these beautiful plants here. Next slide. Here's a better detail. So you have this rock with this detail, which is very hard. It's called a diabase. And then you have plants coming out of the eroded sandstone on the top. And you have beautifully defined plants here. Next. This is from the Louvre. And botanists have identified this plant successfully. It's a type of iris. And if you look at the beautiful curvature of the leaves, if you look at the little marks on the leaves, and this plant, they've all been identified by botanists. We looked at very intricate images here, and we found other geological things called soul marks. Here is the beautifully bedded sandstone. So botanically and geologically, it's perfection. Next. Now this is an example of what Leonardo drew. This is called a Star of Bethlehem plant. He drew all the plants very accurately. Any botanist knows what these plants are. And this is all part of who he was as an artist. Next. Now let's look at the two together. Here's the Louvre, and here is the National Gallery. Now, I really can't say much about the rocks in the National Gallery because they're unidentifiable to me. And then the plants. Now the plants are all fake because this botanist analyzed them, and these are maybe kind of a daffodil kind of flower, but they're on the wrong stem. And they also have the wrong number of petals. And then this is another made-up plant. And it was really funny because I put his quote in the book. He's head of the Yorkshire Arboretum. And he was like saying, oh, isn't it nice that Leonardo made up these plants? Like they're all fantasy, you know? And I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Meanwhile he goes, now in the Louvre, you know, this is an Iris Germanicus, this is this and this and this, and all the Latin names and everything. And he goes, oh, and then he went into fantasy. Well, he didn't go into fantasy because he didn't paint this. So anyway, you have your wonderful bedded sandstone here. You have your pebbles, your soil marks. You have all the plants that are identifiable. Next. So here we have the London picture, and I did this sketch, and I really can't say anything because, I mean, I was like, give me something to work with here. Give me a rock, give me something. But as you can see this definition goes up to the top. The rocks here are very, very hard. They're a diabase, I would think, but whatever they are very hard. So it would be very hard for plants to grow out of such a hard rock. The plants are fake. Everything is just sort of fake in this picture. So I I couldn't do much with it. But I do know that Leonardo would not have painted something like this. Let's go on to the next slide. So this is just like always a joy to see, because you have very, very sophisticated techniques here. You see this diabase sill, not exactly 90 degrees. It means nothing to you. But to a geologist, it means everything, because it means that the whole scientific authenticity is correct. And we could just identify every single thing here painted with incredible accuracy. And then if you combine the plants on top, it's just a tour de force. This can be used as an exhibit in any geology book. Next slide, please. So now I want you to just look at the two side by side and see if what you thought initially kind of corresponds with what you're seeing now, because you must have had some opinion about the two paintings. So since this is the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, I want to bring in how Leonardo was involved in the Immaculate Conception with this painting, because it gets better. It wasn't just about the rocks, it wasn't about the botany, but he was involved in a big argument about the idea of the Immaculate Conception. The Immaculate Conception is not about Christ's birth, it's about the Virgin Mary's conception. So it's about Saint Anne, for whom I'm named, the grandmother of Christ, because some factions, like the Franciscans, said Mary had to be born without sin in order to have a son born without sin. So she must be immaculate. But the Dominicans said, this is crazy. No. And they were called maculists. So during Leonardo's commission of the Virgin of the Rocks, there was a big argument between the Franciscan Immaculates and the Dominican Maculists. And Leonardo was pulled into it because the people that commissioned the painting were Franciscans. So he had to please them, but since he was a working guy, he didn't want to piss off any Dominican commissions, you know? So what happened was, being a great geologist, he goes, what am I going to do here? I am going to put Mary in a grotto. And what is a grotto? Grotto is the ancient concept of femininity. It's the womb. It's the uterus. It's the place in the earth by which things are born. It's the ultimate symbol of femininity. He puts the grotto up there, and very diplomatically, he has fulfilled his obligation. He doesn't upset anybody, but all the symbolism is in this one magnificent, geologically accurate painting. And he did it with great savoir-faire and great diplomacy. Next. So I want to just leave you with a quote by our dear friend. I roamed the countryside searching for answers to things I did not understand. These questions and other strange phenomena engaged my thought throughout my life. Next slide. So I just want to leave you with one question. What secrets will the earth reveal to you today? Thank you. That's it.
The one, are you saying that it's a forgery?
I'm saying Leonardo did not paint the one in London.
Yeah. Do they have? Did they try to determine the date of the painting?
Yes, and it keeps changing according to the National Gallery's whim. Originally, it was about 1506, but since that would have destroyed many of their arguments. They're saying it was started in 1490, then finished in 1510.
They're looking at the age of paint.
Yeah. They're moving the date around because they're losing ground in their spurious arguments. So that's the problem.
It really looks like two different artists.
Thank you. Thank you. I gave this talk to a bunch of geologists, and at the end it was like, well, duh, can't anybody see it? And it doesn't work that way in art history, unfortunately. Yes?
Yes, a number of years ago, my wife and I were in Perugia, in the seismic center, and they have a rope, a very old rope suspended from way high up in the room, going down, and a plumb bob at the end, and it's over a barrel of sand, which they smooth occasionally, and it's a very early form of seismic detection. Now, also in the same room, they have very sensitive instruments, and at one point, one of them started clattering, and my wife said, "What's that?" And they said, "Oh, that's the waves hitting the shore in the Adriatic." So there we were in the center of Umbria, completely landlocked, and the instrument was detecting that. But I wanted to ask you,
Yes.
how long have the Jesuits been so involved with geology and seismology?
Oh, that's my favorite subject. I love the Jesuits. Mainly because I just went to a conference that was not Jesuit sponsored, and I was very upset because these people are not coming from a scientific perspective. The Jesuits have always been the scientists, and even now, the Vatican Observatory is run by the Jesuits. I mean, and I have to say, the Catholic Church really did a lot for science. I mean, they have some real black marks, but compared to other religions, they can be very open. And, it's really funny because I was talking to some people, and because people are saying that this is a spiritual book, which I find intriguing. But then, as I'm talking to people, they're saying, well, if you discover all these marvels of the earth, these miracles, these things that are really incredible, then that must lead you to the divine as well. And I think that anytime you study science, like all the stuff in astronomy now, when they had that black hole and they're seeing light, that was lightning formed 250 million light years ago that's just reaching the Earth now. You have to say, wait a minute, what's happening here? So I think that once you start studying these things, you have to question and go closer to the divine. So I don't think it's the church is against science, but the Jesuits have been involved since they started. Big science people. Yes.
Has anybody identified an exact location where Leonardo, that might have inspired Leonardo for the backdrop of the painting? Or do you feel like it was a conglomerate?
Me, I went and I did all this stuff. I followed all his footsteps. I have found the location where he painted the Mona Lisa. I've found the location where he painted the Virgin of St. Anne. I have not found this location because it's almost too generic. So far I haven't found it. And certainly places like this could exist, but haven't gotten there yet. Other places I've found them, yeah.
Where did he paint the Mona?
The Mona Lisa, it was painted in Lecco in the north. And the Virgin of St. Anne was a bit north of there in the Valsassina area. But that's where he did all of his walking and hiking. Yes?
I think you said it was in Tuscany with various rivers.
Yes.
And you said, when you compare it to a modern map, and you made a comment such as, where was Leonardo? In an airplane? And my question is, what is your best guess? How did he get it so right? He wasn't in an airplane. So how, in your guess, could he have come up with something that almost aligns with contemporary?
I don't know. I don't know. And I pose this to my geologist friends, and they don't know either, because there's no mountain there. It's in a valley. So we were like, well, you could have gotten one perspective, but not all the different perspectives. He did that when he was working as an engineer for Cesare Borgia. He was trying to divert the Arno away from Pisa so that Pisa would go bankrupt. It was that kind of job. He didn't just fool around in small stuff. It's like, well, let's just move the river. But I don't know. And that's the other thing. There's so many things I don't know that that's why I named the book Tweeting Da Vinci, because I really hoped it would be multimedia, and that if people came up with an idea, we could tweet it and we could come up with some answers, because I would really like to know, or I would like to be proven wrong. I don't care. I have a lot of questions. Yes?
In that time, he was made military. He was working in
Yes.
with armaments, and he may have known a great deal about trajectory, also maybe measurements from stars, and there was some at that time too. Optics were available. The idea of magnification and so forth. So he may have understood topography and also some type of angle, trigonometry or something like that. It could have helped him.
You see, this is great. Yeah, could be. Could be. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much. It's just been a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you, Stefano.
Thank you, Anne, for taking us on your journey and really giving us your enthusiasm for the things that you study. It's very hard to find it in somebody who has devoted some time and still has the same passion for it. And I just remind you that there are copies of Ann Pizzorusso's book upstairs available for purchase, and Anne will be able and willing and happy to sign them for you. Thank you all again very much.